Hello folks, my name is Dr. Zachariah Hildenbrand. I'm here with my colleague Dr. Kevin Shug, and we are the Collaborative Laboratories for Environmental Analysis and Remediation at the University of Texas at Arlington. We're coming to you from the Responsible Shale Energy Extraction Conference, which is a very unique event bringing together scientists, concerned citizens, operators, regulators, and technology companies to have an honest series of conversations about environmental stewardship in shale energy.
We'd really like to thank the support of the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation and Earth Day Texas for allowing us to put on this event. We believe that this content that we're going to be providing to those who haven't been able to attend is going to help answer and educate a lot of questions surrounding responsible shale energy extraction. So we hope you enjoy the content.
This panel is going to be moderated by Brett Shipp of WFAA News. For those of you who are local in this area, nobody has covered groundwater issues associated with hydraulic fracturing with more vigor, intensity, and integrity than Brett Shipp, and so it's a real pleasure to have him here moderating this. So let's put a round of applause together for these folks.
Zach says that because he's in all my stories. So of course, he agrees with the integrity of my subject matter and the findings. Hey everyone. Thank you for coming out this morning. I don't know if this is going to be an exciting, no it is. It's going to be an exciting roundtable because I'm going to make it exciting and these guys have no idea how I'm going to do that. But it's my pleasure to introduce three very esteemed, prominent scientists, seismologists who are going to engage in this conversation. And I'm just going to go ahead and call it fracking-related earthquakes. And I know that makes all three of them cringe because they're scientists and that's not how they conduct their business. But I think what we're doing is speaking to the public, and I think we're trying to bring clarity to an issue that is extremely serious. It is an evolving topic that I think needs serious exploration and explanation, and we're here to do that this morning. Peter Hennings is a seismologist, University of Texas, with the Bureau of Economic Geology. Dr. Brian Stump, seismology at SMU, done a lot of critical work, and Dr. Alexandros Savvaidis, correct, also with the Bureau of Economic Geology. And I wonder about that. Peter, tell me, what is economic geology? What is the Bureau of Economic Geology? I think it's kind of an interesting term.
Right. Just one thing in correction, I'm not a seismologist. These two colleagues are. I'm a geologist and actually a structural geologist. So just for the record, I study things like stress and faults and those sorts of things. But nonetheless, I'm deeply part of this topic. The Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas was the first research branch established by the university over 100 years ago. So it is a research institution and it does research on topics of geology and economic geology in the state of Texas, understanding our oil and gas resources, understanding resources of water and environment, and all of those sorts of topics. We are a soft money organization. We get some funding from the state of Texas. We compete for grants internationally, and we do a lot of contract research for a lot of different stakeholders, including the oil and gas industry.
Is that where you get your money?
Say again?
Is that where you get your money? From the industry?
We get some of our money from the industry.
What percentage?
The Bureau as a whole, I can't give you a good answer. I'd have to say maybe a third or something like that.
Okay, good. Dr. Stump, your work at SMU is very renowned. I'm going to read something real quick. I'm going to jump right into the fire here. On January 1st, 2015, a 2.4 magnitude earthquake recorded at 8:29 p.m., estimated to be near the old Texas Stadium site, was the 17th earthquake felt in the area. This is from a news report at the time. Since early September of 2013 and 2014 rather. When that happened, How big of an event was that for you?
This is showing my age, I guess, but I came to SMU in 1983 to study earthquakes, but to study earthquakes globally. And I think in those time periods, we would see 1 or 2 magnitude 3 or so earthquakes a year in the state of Texas. But that rate accelerated beginning in 2008. And so that acceleration included earthquakes in the Fort Worth Basin. And living here, the concern about what those earthquakes meant, that was part of that process in 2015 in my mind.
Right, but that was, what triggered the activity that preceded that event? I mean, what was it about that particular earthquake that really started the conversation in Texas?
I guess I might have said that conversation went back prior to that time.
Sure it
period.
did.
It was actually Halloween night, 2008, when the first set of earthquakes in the Fort Worth Basin were initially felt in the area.
And did you study that?
Yeah.
What were
a number of people have studied those earthquakes in the Fort Worth Basin.
What was your finding as a result?
So our conclusion was based on the locations of the events and the timing that we thought that there was a plausible link to a wastewater disposal well that was near the airport.
A plausible link?
Yes.
Did you get any pushback on that?
I think there was lots of discussion about that, but I felt that we had a fair discussion about those issues.
Okay. Dr. Savvaidis, were you in Texas at the time?
No, I just moved like 1.5 years ago.
Say again?
I moved here
A year ago?
1.5 years ago.
1.5 years ago. And tell us about your work at the University of Texas.
I started in January 2016. I came just to start the Texas Seismological Network. So I'm a seismologist in profession. So I'm managing the network. So we started deploying the stations that the state is funding around the state and started recording any type of ground motion.
And since you've been here, describe for me the interesting events of seismic activity that has captured your attention.
What exactly you mean by interesting events? I mean, there has been not such big activity the last 1.5 years.
There's not been a lot of activity since you arrived?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Tell us what you're doing then.
We are deploying the station in order to start recording the type of ground motion activity we have on the state.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about TextNet. Now, can we talk about TextNet and what it is, what its mission is, and what it is achieving? Have any reports been issued at all?
I can start with the network, and then my fellows here can go on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the state is funding the deployment of a new state network that is complementary to the existing one. So we have acquired a lot of new instrumentation. We are contacting different landowners, and we are deploying the permanent stations in order to make an evenly grid space network. And then we have portable stations that we are already started deploying in different areas of interest.
Okay, so you're deploying instruments to measure seismology, but you're saying to me that there, and Dr. Hennings, surely jump in, there really haven't been any interesting or noteworthy events since TechNet was started and these instruments deployed?
Well, all right, just a little more history on TextNet leading up to, I hope, an answer to your question. 2 years ago, based on the concerns of the apparent increase in the rate of seismicity in Texas and building there on the research that has been done in places like Brian's group at SMU, the state of Texas made $4.7 million available. And that money is for largely 2 purposes. One is for Alexandros and his team to put out both permanent and temporary seismic stations all over the state. And when Alexandros is finished with deploying his network by the middle of this summer probably, there will be something like 70 stations around the state that will be actively recording and streaming seismicity data for use by the Bureau of Economic Geology, but scientists in general. And so one of the goals of TexNet then is to acquire this data and to then study it. And that's more where I come in, is the study of not only the earthquakes, but the whole ecosystem that those earthquakes might be happening in the subsurface. Understanding where injection has occurred, understanding fluid pressures, where might there be faults or faults of concern, and how fluid pressures and those faults interact to potentially pose concern. And we also have other topics that go beyond what TexNet is funding, that our industry sponsors are also funding our research groups to pursue.
Sure, go ahead, Dr. Stump.
I'd like to add to that. You asked me about the 2008 event, and I said the linkage was plausible because it was really a time and space correlation of earthquakes and injection. But if we're really to understand whether or not injection causes the earthquakes, we need to understand the physics of those processes. And so and when I say physics, if it's the fluids, how the fluids migrate and how they change pressures, where existing faults are. And by doing those kinds of scientific studies, which I think TexNet is supporting, we can think about mitigation and make a stronger link between an event and possible industry practices.
Sure, and you've done extensive work in that area, and I want to call everyone's attention to, and I'm reading from the Texas Railroad Commission hearings report. This is dated, the hearing on this was April 24th. The report was generated, I think, September of 2015, and it says on April 21st, 2015, the results of a study entitled Casual Factors for Seismicity Near Azle, Texas. The authors of the article include scientists from the Huffington Department of Earth Sciences at SMU, that's you, correct, Dr. Stump? And a quote from the findings of that research: on the basis of modeling results and the absence of historical earthquakes near Azle, brine production combined with wastewater disposal represented the most likely cause of recent seismicity near Azle. You're aware of this Railroad Commission report, correct? Yes. Dr. Stump, did you provide input into this hearing?
We published papers that were made available to the hearing. So
nobody actually testified, though?
No.
You're aware, Dr. Stump, of the result of this hearing, are you not?
Yes.
Let me talk about that just a little bit. This is a hearing on this earthquake and its potential relation to the fracking industry and specifically wastewater injection. And the examiner's analysis of the evidence is such: several flaws identified with the model. I think the model is your report, is it not?
It's my colleagues and mine.
Correct. Several flaws identified with the model, however, limits its use. Specifically, the pressure modeling effort was not sufficient to establish mechanical linkage between the site of the injection and the locus of initial rupture on the Azle fault at the depth of 20,000 feet. Thus, evidence demonstrating a likely contribution from the site of injection is lacking. Therefore, the examiners conclude that the evidence in the record does not support the finding that this particular gas operation was responsible for. What was your response to this report?
I guess I think of it in a broader sense, maybe, that what science is about and how science is an evolving process. We build models to explain the data we see around us. Those models take input data, and I think that the Azle study was a start down that kind of a path of where fluids are injected, where the faults are, how the fluids will migrate, and building physical models that go along with that data. We share that with our colleagues for criticism, and we welcome that criticism because the next generation of models become improved. And I guess maybe in my mind, those hearings motivate some of the work that's going on in TechSnet. Peter may disagree with me, but I think in terms of trying to understand what the subsurface does, where the fluids migrate. And I guess I might add that we're an academic institution, but to really solve these kinds of problems, there's a wide variety of expertise and people that need to participate in these kinds. It involves industry as well.
Dr. Hennings, what was your opinion of this report?
Well, first of all, I'm going to agree with you only in this case, Brian. And what I would say is that the SMU study that was published and was used at that hearing was a really good first attempt at subsurface integration. And that subsurface integration is now where all of these scientific efforts are headed. So since then...
What does that mean, subsurface integration?
So that's really what Brian has said. That is where you try to build physically complete models that you're looking at the injection of the fluids and their timing, where the faults are, how the fluids might move through the subsurface towards those faults, and the stress conditions that those faults sit under. So since that time of that publication and many other like it, the state of Texas has asked that we do more in-depth work. We now, in our group, are funded by a dozen large energy companies who want better models, more complete models to understand the physics behind this. Everybody is now saying that, yeah, those earlier attempts had strengths and weaknesses. We can do better, and now that's what our efforts are focused on.
Dr. Savvaidis?
Yes.
What are your thoughts about the hearing and the conclusion of this report from the Texas Railroad Commission as it pertains to the studies done by SMU on the Azle earthquake and its potential relationship to fracking activity?
I would agree with my colleagues. I think it's a first attempt to try to see if there is any relation, but I think more information, more studies.
Why do you say it's a first attempt?
Because that's specific for this area, and maybe we need more data in order to go further to other findings in the state of Texas.
Dr. Stump, is this a first attempt?
Well, what I would say is if we kind of zoom back and take a international kind of perspective on induced seismicity, I think that it's been recognized since the 60s that fluids can disturb stress regimes on faults. Many of them may be old and inactive today. It goes back to the Rocky Mountain Arsenal work in the 60s, Paradox Valley in the Utah region, globally, and more recently in Kansas and Oklahoma, and in Ohio and in Canada. Similar studies are underway trying to improve the data and the models for this linkage.
Well, that was an interesting segue, because let's talk about what's going on in Oklahoma right now. I know all of you are familiar with the activities, the daily, almost daily activity of seismic events in Oklahoma. In 2015, there were 6,000 quakes recorded at the level of 2.6 and above. 900 that year, 900 events. How much study have you guys, all of you, given to the seismic activities and its equation with the industry in Oklahoma? Dr. Hennings?
I've done no work in Oklahoma. I have followed that history over the last 10 years or so. And I was in industry. I had 25 years in the petroleum industry. And in the last 5 years I was there for the company I was working for, I was the point contact for this particular topic. And we were keenly watching what was happening in Oklahoma and trying to learn from it and understand. And I think in terms of strengthening our understanding of the relationship between injection and seismicity, the Oklahoma case as an area is the most instructive, because what we've seen now is the Oklahoma Corporation Commission over the last year or so has required that operators inject far fewer volumes of fluids, and also the economic downturn resulted in a reduction in the injection of fluids. And now you can see very clearly the rate of seismicity is decreasing commensurately with that reduction in subsurface disposal operation. And so from a scientific perspective, viewing Oklahoma as kind of as a crucible, we're probably learning more about this very coupled system from there than any other single case globally.
Correct. In fact, it's pretty much been cut in half, has it not? Dr. Savvaidis, so what are your observations of the seismic activity and any relationship to the industry in Oklahoma's situation?
We are not locating any events. I mean, it's not a part of TextNet. We're working on Oklahoma events. But I would agree that there is a decrease in seismicity. That's the findings we see from our colleagues in the area.
But is the geology anywhere is it similar at all? I mean, can you take any examples of any activity in Oklahoma and marry the seismology or the geology?
Part of the North Texas geology is similar to Oklahoma.
Okay.
But we are not doing any locations in that area ourselves, so that's not part of what we do is managing the network of Texas. But as far as concerns the findings of our colleagues in Oklahoma, I mean, we follow up with them what's happening, and we agree that the seismicity has been decreased.
There seems to be, to me, a marked and a distinct disconnect between the handling of these events in Oklahoma and Texas. In Oklahoma, very clearly, even the governor has embraced the connection between earthquakes and oil production, and she's a very, business-minded, conservative Republican in Oklahoma. In fact, the state geologists and the state seismologists and the politicians all agree and have implemented laws, correct me if I'm wrong, to address what they see as a very clear-cut relationship between seismology and wastewater injection. Does anybody disagree with that?
Well, I think Oklahoma has taken very proactive measures, and they needed to take proactive measures in the face of the increase in seismicity. But in the state of Texas, proactive measures have also been instituted. The Railroad Commission has the new seismicity rules, meaning that injection wells have to take into account if there is evidence of historical seismicity in the area, if there is evidence of problematic faults in the area. And those new rules that the Railroad Commission, our oil and gas regulator in Texas, have instituted have already been causing a change in practice in Texas. So I would say that there is proactive measures happening on both sides of the Red River.
So, Dr. Hennings, are you saying that wastewater injection permits are actively and aggressively being denied in Texas?
I can't index that with the word aggressive, but I do know that the Railroad Commission has, in the last couple of years, has denied numerous applications based on the new rules that they've implemented in regard to this topic.
Okay, so then that is the new rules taking effect and working. And let's talk about, before I get to some questions, and thank you for your patience, the events, the seismic events, reportable seismic events in Texas or North Texas specifically. What have we seen in the last year? Dr. Stump?
So there's a remarkable decrease in seismicity. And the seismicity in the areas that we've talked about in Venus and in Irving and Hazel have decayed over the last last year, not unlike what we see in Oklahoma. And I think that trying to understand that in the context of what these models is going to be an important part of us assessing these kind of problems.
Sure. Okay. And so I guess there is a cause and effect here. I think, can we agree that the limiting of activity has or is apparently resulting in fewer earthquakes? I mean, is it too early to make that leap? I guess I'm setting my question.
I don't think it's too early. I think what we're seeing in Oklahoma and Kansas, Colorado, Texas, and other areas is that this is turning into a manageable issue.
Sure.
In other words, with proactive measures in rules and mitigation, the unwanted consequences can be managed. Now, we're not at the end of that journey yet,
Sure.
but we have a recipe for how that management can be carried out.
Okay. Yeah, sure. And one other question before I get to the questions. Thank you for indulging me. The big earthquakes in Oklahoma continue. And, you know, we've seen their activity and their attempts to reduce seismic activity, but the big ones keep happening. And I think there was a 5.8 a few months ago, right? In Pawnee or in that vicinity. Anyone, why do we keep seeing the big ones in Oklahoma? Any clue?
I think one of the things that we've seen in other areas, such as the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, that even after we stop injecting, there's a time period over which relaxation and changes in the earth occur. And so sometimes the larger earthquakes happen late in a sequence. And we probably don't completely understand why that is in all cases.
Do we still believe that because they're happening in that region, they are man-made activity induced?
I think that there's good evidence that there's a linkage between man-made activities and earthquakes that are associated. I think part of the things that we don't do very well is I can't tell how big earthquakes are going to become. And the other thing is that when we think about fluids and their impact on the surrounding material, how far and how fast. So where do the fluids move? What's the range of influence?
Okay, we know how you feel. Dr. Hennings, how do you feel? Is there a direct relationship between seismic activity and injection wells?
Yeah, just speaking as a scientist, I just have to say that there is a lot of compelling evidence that suggests a linkage between subsurface injection and seismicity. And you really have to look globally at the published accounts when you're sort of considering that answer. The evidence is strong.
Sure. Good. Dr. Savvaidis, real quick, your thought on that topic? Direct relationship, yes? No?
That's the evidence based on what is published. I think there is some, it shows that there is some relation. That's what's happening based on what we see in other places in Canada and Oklahoma.
Sure. Okay. Yes, in line.
But I just always want to add that in the state of Texas, for example, there have been some 40,000 wells permitted for injection since record keeping began in the 1930s. And currently there are 8,000 wells that are permitted for Class 2 deep disposal of fluids. And so it's a big collection of injection wells in Texas, and a tiny fraction of that total number of wells has been associated with the seismicity. So it's not every injection well, it's you know, a tiny fraction.
Fair enough. And could it have something to do with locations of faults?
Absolutely. It has to do with the volumes that are injected, where other wells might be co-located in an area, sensitive faults, the nature of the subsurface formations that the fluids are being injected into. All of those factors, that's why we keep saying that the subsurface integration
So
is the key.
Underscoring the importance of geologic exploration and geologic understanding of where it is you're doing the injecting, and so that work continues, hopefully aggressively. I don't know.
It's expanding.
Good, interesting to
That's
know.
why actually we do all this science. That's locating the earthquakes, getting the new network, minimizing the uncertainty, checking all the geology and the faults that we have in the state of Texas, just to make sure that we have a very good understanding of what's happening.
Sure. Go
I
ahead.
would argue the state of Texas recognized that with the TextNet funding. So 2 years ago, they set aside the funds to put in this network and then develop these kinds of exchanges of data and model.
Good, good,
And,
okay. Go
And
ahead.
last thing on that is
Sure.
the legislature is meeting now, and it's not a guarantee that the TextNet funding will continue. And so it's an important time to make the case for the network to be funded for the next period of time and for the research to continue.
Fantastic. Here's a question. Can earthquakes cause gas, methane gas, I guess, to migrate up into shallow groundwater? And if so, what magnitude earthquake would precipitate that? It's a broad question, but is it possible that earthquakes could have something to do with the release of methane into the water supply, underground water supply? Thoughts?
I don't know that I have a definitive answer, and I might defer to Peter, but I will say that I think one thing that we have learned over the last 3 or 4 years by looking at Oklahoma, looking at Texas, looking at Paradox Valley, is that the faults that are moving are very deep in the basement, and they're not in the sedimentary sections in which we're exploring and recovering oil and gas, and they don't directly connect to our water table, which is much, much shallower. So in most cases, I would say that the chances would be small for that to occur, but it's not absolutely my area of expertise.
No, I agree with that. The chances are small. There's no published linkage between earthquakes and compromises in well integrity. It's conceivable, but there's zero data on it.
Gotcha, I understand. Is the Texas data, TextNet data open access for other researchers to explore and access? Is that any data? But I'm getting a sense there isn't a lot of data out there being generated through TextNet.
We have already deployed 33 stations out of the 55 in total, the new deployed stations. And this data, the raw data, are available through our hub and in the Bureau of Economic Geology, and also available through IRIS.
Is it information that's online?
Yeah, that's the readings we have from the stations that are deployed around the state. They are online, they are available. And soon they will be, we'll come up with a website that will provide earthquake catalog information for the state of Texas.
Okay, and that's on TextNet's website? Okay, okay, great. Dr. Shug, I'm sorry.
IRIS is it's supported by the National Science Foundation. It's a consortium of universities, and the data can be downloaded there.
How do you take into account
And
that?
to give you some
Go ahead.
statistics, there are people outside from the U.S. also that we get some information from IRIS every month. Brian knows that. And there are groups from outside the U.S. that are getting copies of our data.
Right. Is there a correlation, and I think we're stating it here in this question, is it a connection between the reduction in oil and gas production, I guess gas production, in the Barnett Shale area in 2016? Does that equate at all with the reduction in earthquakes? And I guess that's suggesting that fracking, and we'll get to this in a second, but fracking is directly responsible, not the injection, but fracking responsible for earthquakes. I think I know the answer, but tell me, is that correlated, those two things, production and a reduction?
Well, I don't think that work has been done yet, and I know that SMU is working on that, and they have some papers that are coming out very soon. We're working on that. We're building a big integrated model of the entire Fort Worth Basin that sits under the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we're addressing that as well. But the reduction in the rate of wastewater disposal in the Fort Worth Basin is a consequence of the decrease in drilling activity in the state. And I think it was in 2015, the active rig count in the Fort Worth Basin for the first time in decades went to 0. for a period of time. And so these wells do hydraulic stimulation or fracking. That technology was pioneered in the Fort Worth Basin. And after these reservoir stimulations are complete, those fluids are produced back, and they have to be disposed of. And they're disposed of in these deep injection wells. And so when the active rig count goes down, the need for disposal goes down. And so that's why the fluid volumes have decreased. It's not the fracking itself, it's the water that's produced back in that process. But in terms of your question about a link between the decrease in injection and the decrease in seismicity, I ask people to be patient for a year or so while the studies are finished.
But in terms of what's out there, and I think there was a report, I don't know what journal it was in recently, doing I don't know if it's it can't be superficial, but some degree of relationship between the physical fracking process and the drilling and extraction process and seismic activity. Generally, all three of you or any of you believe that there is any shred of evidence that there is a connection between the actual drilling and extraction process and seismic activity?
So I think there's some limited experience in the United States, a handful of cases where a actual hydrofrac fracks into a fault and triggers an earthquake. There's some evidence in Western Canada of those instances, but we have very few indications of that going on in the United States. Probably has to do with the particular geology and the setting and how close the faults are to where the hydrofracking is ongoing. In our case, in Texas, the faults are in the basement a long ways from the production, and so you would have much less chance of that occurring.
Okay, Dr. Savvaidis, any thoughts on that?
I agree with Brian. I mean, that's the research that has been done in West Canada. It shows that there is some relation with fracking, but it's too early to say something like that for the state of Texas.
How can the seismic network measurements be used to monitor and regulate operators and service companies? Is that part of the plan?
Then
It's not part of our research plan. Our research is focused on putting out the network, generating the data, and looking at what's happening in the subsurface. Policy and regulation is not something that we're funded, nor will we do. But with the studies that have come out and will come out, the regulators will pay attention to that, and it'll be their job to take action.
Okay.
Could I add something to that? So I think it's a point that's sometimes missed in that we do have a global network of seismographic stations. And so moderate sized earthquakes are regularly located here. But it's just like when I go to the doctor and I have something like my arm hurts. He wants more data, and he wants to refine the location of where that damage might be. And so I go in for a CAT scan. And so essentially TexNet's bringing in more stations, providing better, more precise locations so we can actually image the faults that are causing the earthquakes. That is the basis then for looking at these other linkages.
Data, data, data. Nobody is suggesting that data is, there's such a thing as too much data. My question is the analysis of data and the integrity of the analysis of that data. How do we ensure that there aren't external forces outside of the scientific community providing pressure or input into the analysis of that data?
I'd say by making the data available to all parties.
And is that's the plan?
Yeah.
I think Dr. Hennings has already said that is, all part of the master plan here is to gather as much as you can and process it with integrity as best you can. Companies, this is a question, I'm not sure I understand. Companies don't have to report injection in real time. They don't have to report their wastewater injection in real time. How does that affect the research? Is that a good question?
It's a very important question. The Railroad Commission requires that subsurface injection be recorded monthly and reported annually. And every little area they call them fields, has its own reporting date. And so if you would like to sum up the amount of injection in the Fort Worth Basin, then you have to wait a year for all of the data to be reported, because it's possible that a company could inject in January but not have to report that injection until their reporting date, which could be up to a year later. Then it takes a railroad commission, because they're not very amply staffed. It takes them another couple of months to make that data available for research. And so it's about 15 months of a conceivable delay. And yes, that does cause a delay in the research. And the question you asked about the decrease in seismicity in the Fort Worth Basin and the decrease in injection, the main limiting factor in the timeliness of that research is getting those injection volumes available for study.
What do you tell people who are, let's call them the victims of seismological events that, you know, in our case, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, startle us? In the case of Oklahoma, give them cause for pause for their safety. What do you say to the general public who is obviously not informed as to what could happen and what is being done? What do you say?
There's three things I'd say. I'd say the first is that living in an area where we've never felt an earthquake, when we feel an earthquake, we feel somewhat powerless. And so we have to understand that as humans. I think the second thing is, fortunate for us in Texas, is these earthquakes have been moderate in size. That doesn't mean that they might not have caused minor kinds of damage, but they've been moderate in size. I think the third thing is that we need, and that's why the kind of work that we're doing needs to be done, is to estimate what the probability of larger magnitude events are so that we can think about reducing the risk from those kinds. That's not a short-term kind of a thing, and it's not very, you know, it doesn't help us with our human emotions in these processes. But it's part of a broader conversation like we're having here today, I think, that will help us with that.
And I would just add, you know, since you asked what we would say, I would say get more information, because with information that helps to overcome the anxiety of something that could be so unsettling. The more you know, the more you communicate and become informed, the more comfortable you start to be that at least you have a grasp on what's happening.
Sure. Dr. Smith?
And myself, but to add something else. I think that now with TechSnet we have all the information to proactively be prepared for and prepare the public for anything that might happen in the future.
Right. And last question is coming from me. Is everybody satisfied, are the three of you satisfied with the direction this state is going in terms of trying to get a handle on the earthquake issue, which, it's out of sight, out of mind. None of us thinks about it until that next jolt happens, and then we're like, damn it, what are they going to do about it? Are we doing everything we can about this issue, even though we know it's not as severe as Oklahoma, but are we doing everything we can right now? Are you guys happy?
I guess I was encouraged by the fact that the state saw the possible implications for earthquakes and made an effort to fund TechSnet. I would be, and this is just me personally, but I would personally be very disappointed if we weren't able to continue that program and analyze the data to try to assess these questions, particularly in the context of, because of possibly the downturn in industry, the decrease in the number of earthquakes for a short term.
And I would add to that, I'm also optimistic because a quarter of the funding that we have at the Bureau of Economic Geology on this topic comes from industry, and our industry partners want to know answers just as much as the public and just as much as we do. They are very keen to understand how they fit into this and what they need to do to improve practices so that this is the issue is mitigated.
As long as the solutions are scientific and not political. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, completely scientific.
Good. Guys, awesome. Thank you very much, all three.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice.